Welcome to Talking Postgres, a monthly podcast for developers who love this database. I'm your host, Claire Giordano, and in this pod, we explore the human side of Postgres, databases, and open source, which means why do people who work with Postgres do what they do, and how did they get there? Thank you to the team at Microsoft for sponsoring this community conversation. Today's guest is Tomasz Vondra. He is a Postgres major contributor, a committer. He works on the Postgres team at Microsoft. He's very involved with the Prague local user group and is one of the organizers of the, let's see if I get it right, the Prague Postgres Developer Day, which I just call P2D2. He is well known for his work on performance in the Postgres project, and that led to today's topic as well. Welcome, Tomasz.
Hello, happy to be here.
I'm really glad you're here. So today's topic is why it's fun to hack on Postgres performance, and that is because, fairly or unfairly, you have a reputation for working on the performance of Postgres. So hopefully we can dive into why it is that you do that, and hopefully get some, I don't know, tips, suggestions, ideas, insights that'll benefit other people in their work with Postgres. But before we do any of that, I always like to start with an origin story, particularly if people are listening who are still getting their schooling or training and are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their career. I think it's always interesting to hear from people about how they got their start.
Yeah, sure. I guess you want me to explain how I got to work on Postgres and how I got to work on like performance stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I think I already told this story like multiple times, but maybe only to individual people. I think in like 2004, 2003, or something like that, I've been still at the university and I've been studying like software engineering and that kind of stuff. And as a part-time job, I've been working at the company that was, operating a couple like e-commerce websites because that was after the dot-com boom. So a lot of the commerce was already done on the internet. And they've been running a couple like pharmacies and that kind of stuff. And most of that was operated on actually MySQL and PHP and like pretty basic stuff. And um, I think we had at some point like serious performance issues. Like essentially, the websites couldn't actually keep up with even just like a couple dozen like customers visiting the website. And the management came with the request like we need to solve that. And one of the options was to just buy a commercial database like Oracle, but that was like extremely expensive, right? Even then, it was like a very small company, and we couldn't actually afford, I think, uh, that amount of money, or it seemed like unwise investment. So at some point, we decided to investigate like what are the other options, like what other databases could we use, and we actually realized there is another database which some people suggested was like a better for complex queries and so on, and that was Postgres. So I think at that point it was Postgres 7.4 or maybe 8.0 or something like that. So we gave that a try. We essentially migrated the website and everything to Postgres because we needed to see how that actually will perform on that database. And the funny story was that it actually, at that point, we found that actually it wasn't caused by the database at all. It was just like a really poorly written application in PHP because it was the worst pattern in the code was that it first selected all the products to list on a page, but it only got the IDs, right? And then for each product, it did like individual queries for each other field it needed to look up. So it was like thousands of queries per page instead of like a single query, and that would kill any database. So we changed how the code actually worked, but in the end we decided to stay with Postgres anyway, because we just liked some of the features of Postgres, like which MySQL didn't have, and also it was like much more, I think, reliable than MySQL, because at that point MySQL only had MySM. It didn't actually have proper like transaction control and all of that. So we stuck with Postgres, even though it actually didn't solve the actual performance problem. So, but that's how I got to work on Postgres, and it's also how I started working on like performance stuff, because first we've been solving a performance issue. That's how we got to work with Postgres at all. But also, after we kept using Postgres, we kept running into like complex queries and queries that didn't actually perform well and that kind of stuff. And in our team, we needed someone who would actually focus on these problems, and it happened to be me. So I
So to
started
be
working on the
clear, this is a
yes,
part-time job and you are still in university. Um,
yes,
and so kind of in the very beginning, performance and Postgres in
yes,
response to the situation. Oh,
exactly, yes.
so the rest of us are so lucky that that happened. I mean, it's kind of happenstance.
I that's a good question. I don't know if it was that I was forced to work on these things, but also it was like a personal choice, right? Like in the team, someone had to do that, but I also personally like gravitated to this kind of work. So
Okay.
it was also, if I didn't like working on these problems, I wouldn't be working on that at all, right? So I wasn't forced, but I had the chance actually to work on that.
Okay, speaking of gravitating to things, when we started this conversation a few minutes ago, I think I was pulling you away from something else that you were doing, which is watching the Olympic ice hockey game. So
Yes,
what's the score? It's Czech Republic versus Canada, is that right?
yes. I don't
And
know. I think
Aaron is
I don't know
putting
what's
into
the
the
score right
chat.
now.
Aaron's putting
I
into
don't
the
know.
chat that it's 3-3. And after
Yeah,
a 3-minute intermission, there will be a 10-minute overtime period of 3-on-3 hockey. So that's kind of exciting. Um,
yeah.
do we need to pause so you can go watch this?
No, I mean, like I'm not a huge hockey fan, but also like playing Canada is a big deal, I think. So it's fun,
Yeah.
right? Like
And our co-producer who's on the text chat right now, Aaron Wisling, he is from Canada. So I can imagine that he's rooting for the other team and not aligned with you in this instant. Well, we'll keep an eye on the text chat as to what's happening and we'll find out whether you should celebrate or not. Um,
yeah.
okay, so you just answered the question, not only how did you get started as a developer, but how you got started with Postgres and how you got started in performance, all in one answer. Um, so let's see. Um, when you think about working on Postgres performance, you just said you gravitated to that kind of work then, but you still gravitate to that kind of work now. So,
Hmm.
what is it about performance that you find so interesting?
That's a good question, but I think I'm focusing on like query planning and like query execution, because there is actually a fair amount of like mathematics and like problem solving thing. And I think that there's also a lot of like engineering um, in making good trade-offs, right? Like when deciding how to execute a query, or like which path to take. I think you need to think about a lot of problems. Um, I I do have like a personal like theory of how the human mind works, and I think there are like two extremes. That's how I imagine that. One is like analytical mind, and that's someone who is able to like investigate individual problems and like go deep into that. And then there is another extreme, which is like synthesis, right? Like someone who is able to construct a complex problem and like describe, like construct an API and so on. And I'm very clearly in the first group. I think I'm much better in like problem solving, investigating problems, and a lot of the performance problems that I've been working on are exactly that, right? Like you need to take a slow query or something that doesn't work well and investigate like why is it happening, right? So, and I think that's why I've been gravitating to this kind of work. So,
What's it feel like when you solve one of these performance problems? And maybe help the listeners understand, how big are these problems? When you talk about investigating a performance issue in Postgres and solving it, does it take you an hour or does it take you a month? Like, or more?
I think it varies a lot. I mean,
I thought you were going to say it depends.
I think some of the slow queries, right? Like, you will immediately recognize like why is it slow and how to fix it, um, because a lot of the queries are slow for the same reason. But then there are also problems that are like complicated and completely like novel, right? Like it's a problem that no one actually investigated before, or maybe not sufficiently, and that can take, I don't know, a week to even just build the understanding of like do enough experiments to actually understand what is happening, and then it can take a while to actually fix it or like figure out if there even is a solution, because there may not be, right? So I think each of those problems is like a small puzzle. So if you like solving puzzles and like investigating like why things work the way they do, um, I think performance issues might be like a good topic. Um,
I'm curious, do you do puzzles in your non-database part of your life? Um, like jigsaw puzzles or crosswords on your phone or
no, not really, because, and it's a bit weird, but I always hated like doing homeworks because it was
mm,
like made up problem. Like you are only doing the homework because someone wants you to make homework, while the performance issues are like a puzzle that actually are like meaningful. Like it's something that needs to be solved for, I don't know, a customer dashboard actually working fast, right? So that I think makes it different for me.
okay. Um, so I guess that means you don't like read a lot of detective novels or watch murder mysteries on Netflix or anything like that either. Like that love of puzzles doesn't come into that part of your life either.
I do watch movies and so on, of course. Like that's a different thing. But like if I have to make an effort for something, like watching a movie is like a passive thing for me, right?
Okay.
But if I have to spend like a day working on something, I would rather that to be like meaningful thing, right?
Okay. Got it. Um, can you, is there an example that comes to mind um, that you can walk us through to help us understand, like a recent performance puzzle, if you will, that you've had to solve in Postgres? I don't know if there's one that um, is simple enough to make sense on a podcast.
Hmm. So I don't know, but a very simple one would be a thing that, like an optimization that I think I did in like 2014 in hash joins, right? Um, for a long time, Postgres had um, hash tables with chaining, which means that each bucket in the hash table had like 10 tuples in a linked list. And it turns out actually that maybe that was like okay in, I don't know, early 2000s, but at some point uh, it's better to not have any chaining in the hash table, right? So just like we had a problem with a slow hash join. Um, After investigating that for a while, like I don't know, half a day or a day, I realized that it might be maybe caused by having a linked list in each bucket of the hash table. So I rebuilt Postgres with a parameter changed in the hash table code, and it was fast, right? So or much faster, like twice as fast maybe. And after that came like a patch for Postgres, changing how the hash table is built and so on. So it was kind of like experiment, but also like a informed guess about what the problem could be. So it can be even a small change, but this is one of the things that I've been, and I'm still quite proud of, because even a small change in a code which is used a lot can be like a significant difference. Like if you look at all the installations and so on.
You know, one of the interesting things, I've worked at a bunch of different companies in my career, and there's a word at Microsoft. We don't own the word. There's many, many people throughout the world that use it, but it's impact. And so when you're doing your like performance evaluations at the end of the year or whatever, the thing that gets discussed is what was the impact of your work, not
Hmm.
what was your activity, not how much did you get done, but how much did your work change things, whether it's in your case like changing the performance of Postgres. um,
Hmm.
and so I think that's one of the things that must be cool about working on performance is that you can measure the impact. Well, I hope you can. Maybe you can't in all cases. Can you?
I don't know because how do you measure like the difference from I don't know, millions of installations, right? Like we don't have
Mm.
any way to collect the metrics. So, and also if you introduce a new feature for Postgres, I don't think that's any less meaningful for users that actually can benefit from that. So I think at
You're
some
right.
point, I think at some point you just need to believe that what you did actually is useful. So
You're absolutely right. And I take back what I said. I was thinking about that ability to measure that something is 2x faster in a certain scenario. And that's nice, but you're right. How many people and how many applications are actually going to benefit from that?
Mm.
We don't know. Um, there's certainly no data science group out there that's measuring the number of Postgres installations and their scenarios and how they use things. Okay. So there's a bit of a leap of faith when you work on an open source project like this that doesn't have all that um, all of the metrics built in. Um,
I think there definitely is, but also a lot of the people actually working on Postgres are also using Postgres, and they are developing stuff that actually matters for them, right? So for the first couple of years, I've been actually working at companies, either using Postgres to, say, build business intelligence solutions, or later in second quadrant, I've been working for a company providing services and support, right? So we had a very direct information from customers, and we've been often solving problems that actually mattered to the customers. That's what we've been paid for.
okay.
So there is some level of immediate response or immediate feedback. People working on stuff that matters for them personally,
Got
or
it.
yeah.
Okay, which leads me to a question that I should have asked earlier. Like that patch example from 2014 relating to hash joins. Um, was that your first patch? No.
No,
Yes?
I think I wrote a couple patches before. Um, I don't remember how many patches or smaller patches I
So you
wrote
don't
before
remember
that.
your first patch that you submitted?
I think I do remember my first patch. I think first contribution, that was 2010, I think. Um, but there was a very small change in statistics, I
Okay.
think.
Um, One of the talks that I've given at a few of the recent PGConf EUs has to do with like looking at as many contributions as we could look at in a
Mm.
particular release. So we did it, Daniel Gustafson and I did it for Postgres 17 and then also for Postgres 18. And each of those has like a 15-month release cycle. But it's very interesting because when you look and compare between releases and you figure out like how many people made their first ever patch contribution to the code, code or docs, because it's the same source base, right?
Mm.
Um, in that release, there was a sizable number of people, but some of those people are probably drive-by contributors.
Mm.
They probably just needed something, had to scratch an itch, came, contributed, and they're probably never going to contribute again. But I guess in your case, you kept coming back, um, as is the case with all sorts of other people in the community. Like, did you know when you did that first patch that it was going to be more than a drive-by contribution? That it was going to be the first of many, many, many?
No, not really. And I haven't been even thinking about that. I didn't have any a plan to be a major contributor to Postgres or even a committer. I haven't thought about that. I've been simply hacking on the database, which was cool. Um, but also I felt like a part of a group of people, of the community, and that was probably the more important thing. What actually kept me working on Postgres, I think, like the opportunity to work on interesting stuff. So there was one, but also being able to talk to the other developers very openly, meet them at conferences, because I think 2009 or something was the first PGConf EU conference that I attended, right? And I've been going there ever since. And you could just meet all the other developers who implemented or wrote some of the code, and talk to them about like the different ways to maybe improve that, or like problems in the code and that kind of stuff. So
So, so you're saying that the community, the vibe, the culture, um, is part of what kind of kept you coming back. It's part of what hooked you on working on this open source project.
yes,
Is that right?
absolutely.
Okay. That'll probably make a lot of people feel good, right? Because there are so many people who invest their time not just into the code, but also into the conferences and into the culture and the way people treat each other, or the way they try to make sure that new people feel welcome, and
Mm.
so that's kind of a nice compliment what you just said.
Yeah, and it's also true, right? So um, and it's also one of the reasons why I'm still like helping to organize the Prague conference, right? So I think this is like the 15th year that I've been helping to organize. So and
Yeah, so I'll make sure to drop a link to P2D2, the Prague Postgres Developer Day,
yeah,
um, into the show notes for the episode, so that people who are interested in going to Prague can check it out for next year. It happens, well, because of COVID, I think it moved around in those early 2020 years, but
mm,
most recently it's been in January, right before FOSDEM, and it just happened a couple
right,
weeks ago, right?
right,
Okay,
exactly. And it depends on mostly on availability of the venue from the university. So it needs to be in roughly like this time of the year, because that's when the university has an exams period, right? So
got it. So you can get access to the classrooms and things like that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Without students being there for exams or whatever.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the pictures on the website right now, and it looks like the presentation rooms are those kind of classrooms where the chairs go up, right?
Yes,
So people in the back row are much, much higher than the speaker is down below, and everybody gets a good view, and the room looks pretty full too.
yes.
You've got how many people come to this thing?
So I think this year we had like 300, 320 people, but we now have like three tracks, so the rooms are not like too full, I think.
Okay.
So
And then people who attend have to choose. Like that's the
yes,
hard thing about multi-track conferences, is that like oftentimes it's like Murphy's law. Like there are always two things at the same time that I want to go to. But that's just
yeah, that
life.
I don't think we will go for like a fourth track. I mean, like we could, but that wouldn't actually work. And the good thing is that, of course, like the talks are recorded because the university has like a AV system built in, so
Nice.
we can actually publish that.
That's nice because I know the recording of talks is one of the most expensive parts of putting together these Postgres
Hmm.
conferences in some cities. I mean, obviously the costs
Hmm.
vary city by city. Um, One of the things I really liked, and I wasn't there. I came to FOSDEM this year, but I didn't make it to P2D2 first. Um, but you and Nazir Bilal Yavuz, who's another
Hmm.
Postgres contributor, you co-taught a full day workshop called Introduction to Postgres Hacking, and just
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm not mentioning it as an advertisement, but as a thank you, because I know that putting together a full day workshop, right, is a lot of work. And I just love the fact that, and you're not the only one to do these intro to hacking workshops on the planet. There are other people who've done them as well. But I think it's so valuable to help tomorrow's future contributors and committers to, get their feet wet.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot of work to prepare that, and also a bit exhausting to actually do a whole day of like a workshop. But I think it's worth it because I think it ties together like to the effort actually building a community, right? Like being actually able to help other developers and contributors to actually start hacking on Postgres. So I'm in a way I'm just trying to give back what I got from the community, like I don't know, 20 years ago, right?
I'm looking at the abstract for the Intro to Postgres Hacking
Hmm.
workshop right now, and I love the beginning of the last paragraph. We expect basic knowledge of C, but we C, the letter C, the programming language
Hmm.
C, but we don't expect you to know the strange and unique C stuff in Postgres.
Hmm.
I don't know. To me, that's a hook. Like, oh, what's the strange and unique C stuff in Postgres? Um, and then you say that's what the workshop is meant to address. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're supposed to be talking about performance and why it's so fun to hack on Postgres performance. So we're going to circle back to that in a minute. But before we do, um, speaking of you giving back and doing things in the community to help tomorrow's future contributors and committers, one of the other things that I think you started doing sometime in the last year that I think is pretty cool are office hours, which,
Yes.
like, the concept has been around forever. Those of us who went to university probably went to office hours held by our teaching assistants or professors or whatever. Like, okay, so it's not a new concept, but your office hours are like open to the public, right? Anybody who's trying to hack on Postgres? How does it work?
Um,
Tell me.
right. So why I started doing office hours is that sometimes, like for new contributors especially, it can be intimidating to actually post the first patch to the mailing list, right? And maybe they don't even like understand how the mailing list like works, or like how to do that properly and that kind of stuff. Or sometimes people can feel like not sure if the patch they are working on, or like is it even a good idea, or is it something that like we would want actually in Postgres and so on, or how to prepare the patch properly and so on. And then they don't actually end up uh, sending the patch at all, right? Like because just like give up on that. And sometimes the people, like the new contributors, do not actually realize that they can actually write an email to the individual contributors, right? You don't need to communicate with just the mailing list. You can just write to the actually contributors and like ask for help, or like ask for opinions and so on. Like the worst thing that could happen is that they will just not respond, right? Because they have like
Right.
too much work or something. But I wanted to make this like explicit, right? Like to make it sure, like you can kind of like advertise that you can actually reach out to me, and maybe I know nothing about the patch that you are working on. I will not have an opinion, but I could still give you advice uh, how to submit the patch to the mailing list or something, right? Like, or suggest who to talk to or something like that, or give you maybe a little bit of like encouragement to uh, do stuff. And that's what my office hours are. Um, I do that like I do have a slot like every week. People can just send me an email and like ask for a bit of time. I expect people to tell me like what they want to talk about, so that I can prepare, like to keep the half an hour or something, to keep it productive. But beyond that, it's uh, up to you what you want to talk about. Like it should be obviously like a thing about like Postgres coding or like Postgres stuff, uh, but it can be like You can suggest like a completely new patch idea, or uh, maybe you already have a patch and you are just asking, you're wondering how to best submit that to the mailing list. Like, what should you be careful about? Like, if you are forgetting about um, some sort of test, or I don't know, or maybe you already submitted a patch and it's kind of like stuck, right? And that's quite common issue for any developer, because there's just so much work on being done on the mailing list. So maybe I can give you advice like how to try to unstuck that. I don't have like perfect solutions, but I will at least give you an advice what I would do or what I would try doing. So it's
I
more just like an offer to have a chat, right?
I think it's great that you're doing it, and I know you're not the only Postgres committer who has office hours. Um, I am hoping that somewhere, I don't know if where the right place is, whether there should be a channel on the Postgres hacking Discord or a page on the Postgres wiki that's Google searchable or whatever, where those of you who do have office hours kind of have them all listed in one place.
Hmm.
So somebody, a new contributor who's looking for it, is more likely to know about it or discover it. But I will drop a link to your blog's about page, which has the
Hmm.
information about like how to sign up for your office hours. So I'll include that in the show notes for this episode too.
Yeah, thank you. I think the office hours are kind of like an extension of hallway track in at conferences, right? Because and that I think is like a very important part of a conference, which is not transferable through talk recordings, right? And also that's how and where people discuss patches in face to face, right? So I'm trying to
Speaking
do something similar with like office hours. Yes.
speaking about office hours at conferences, speaking about hallway tracks at conferences, like I never understood what that meant when I was earlier in my career. I
Hmm.
remember going to like Usenix conferences and people were talking about the hallway track. I'm like, what do they mean? What is that? Like, I just didn't get it. And I think it's because I just didn't know enough people yet. I
Hmm.
didn't know how to comport myself, how to just walk up to strangers and introduce myself and ask questions. Like I was too intimidated, I think.
Hmm.
I'm not anymore.
Hmm.
But I was then. So anyway, it is true that some of these Postgres conferences have the most amazing, welcoming, interesting hallway tracks, and you can learn as much in the hallway as you do by attending talks. And there's one in particular that's coming up in May, which, if anyone is listening and they are thinking about becoming a contributor, or maybe they're in early days to Postgres, it's called PGConf Dev. It happens annually in Canada. This year, it's going to be in Vancouver, Canada, in May 19th through 22. And I'll drop a link to it in the show notes as well, just in case people want to go check it out. And I know they have really good pricing for, I think, particularly, they probably have student pricing, but the pricing to attend the conference is deliberately low to make it easy for people to be part of it. And let's see, it's 2 days. Okay, there's a pre-conference day, which is actually chock full of amazing sessions this year on Tuesday. So I would say it's not optional. You should be there for Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday are normal conference days, and Friday's an unconference. So basically 4 days. And you are going, right, Tomasz?
Yeah, I definitely plan to go. Yes,
Um,
and I kind of have to because I have a talk there. So.
yes, I plan to go as well. I have a panel and a talk, and it's just so much fun. Um,
Hmm.
particularly if you are if your idea of fun is hanging out with people who enjoy working on databases, um, who it's I don't know, it's one of my favorites. Okay, um, We talked about office hours, and we talked about the intro to hacking workshop and organizing a P2D2 and other ways that you're
Mm.
focused on giving back to the community and helping train like the next generation of contributors. Is before we flip back to performance, is there anything else we should talk about in terms of your community work that's interesting? Um,
I don't know. I think maybe we should just like mention what actually hallway track means, because
okay,
we've been
let's do
just
it.
talking about like um, I think hallway track is the time between talks and after the conference, essentially, like when you can talk to the other engineers and like maybe have a tea or a coffee or a beer or whatever, and discuss the stuff that was maybe mentioned in the talks, or like any other problem or any other patch feature that you are like working on. And the amazing part of the Postgres community is that it's not like a single company, right? Like we are working for different companies, for different customers, different fields, and we still collaborate a lot on all these things. So um, I think the hallway track is the most important part of like the conferences, at least for me. And I think it's important to actually introduce the new people coming to the community to actually to this concept, to how important that is, and also kind of like encourage that. And I think, for example, last year at PGConf Dev, I think it was a great idea that uh, there was like organized dinner, right?
Oh,
Where
the meet and eats.
yes, I mean like instead of, because what often happens at conferences like this is that like you see the people that you know for, I don't know, 20 years, right? So you go to the dinner with them, and the new attendees are kind of like stuck and like left to do their own thing.
Yeah. They
And
don't have an invitation to the
yeah,
dinners
uh,
that exist because they don't know the people yet.
right, exactly. And I think last year there was like a random selection or a random grouping, right, of people um, for the dinner. So you actually got to meet anyone randomly and have a chat with them. And I think it was interesting. I mean, like I was a bit jet lagged, but other than that, I think it was wonderful.
Yeah, and I know that at the meet and eat dinner I went to, people just went around the table and introduced
Mm,
themselves, and um, there's also a fun run for people who are runners who
mm,
want to go for a run one evening. This year, like I said, the Tuesday content is being completely revamped.
mm,
Um, and it hasn't been announced yet, but the intention is to make one of the tracks on Tuesday super interesting to newcomers as well
mm.
as people who've been involved forever. So, and I think the team's going to be successful with that. Uh, okay, well, there is one other thing I want to also talk about in the community area, which is the Postgres hacking Discord,
Mm.
which is somewhat new. We should include a link in the show notes as well. It's only been around for, oh my gosh, it's almost 2 years, but it's more than a year and a half now. Um, Started in summer of 2024, right after PGConf Dev. And anyway, I think there is a monthly hacking workshop that happens there that you have been part of on occasion. Is that right?
Um, I've been, and actually, I will be on the workshop next month, I think,
Oh, cool.
again.
So, what is this? Tell us, please.
So the hacking workshop is a monthly session organized by Robert Haas, um, it where the attendees pick a recorded talk from one of the past conferences. Then they watch the talk on their own,
Okay.
and then there is a session, like an hour, where everyone joins a Zoom, I think, or like video conference, and they can ask questions to the speaker of from the talk recording, right? So they can ask, like, discuss the thing, like they are not watching the recording together, but they can actually discuss what was in the talk and ask questions and that kind of stuff.
So it's like
So
peeling the onion for a whole hour, which is a lot more than
yeah,
the normal like 5-10 minutes of Q&A at the end of a talk.
yes, exactly. And like sometimes the discussion kind of like um, you know gets distracted and like starts talking about stuff that wasn't in the talk but is kind of like related to that, and that's fine, right? I think it's like online hallway track in a way, like being able to discuss technical stuff, right? Kind of like a brainstorming or so on.
Um, I I was up in Redmond last week. I don't, even though I work for Microsoft, I don't actually go up to Seattle very often, maybe
Mm,
like twice a year at the most. Um, and while I was there, I gave a talk at the Seattle Postgres meetup. And I think it was the talk about contributions to Postgres during PG 18. And at the end, and so of course I mentioned the Discord and the monthly hacking workshops and how that Discord initially started as like just the Discord for the mentoring program and then
mm,
expanded its scope and its activity. And anyway, there was a developer who walked up to me at the end and said, "Oh my gosh, that was such a smart move." He said to create a Discord for the Postgres hackers. He said,
mm,
if you want this generation, and we're all on Discord all the time, to kind of be more participative, is that a word?
mm.
He said that was a good call, and
Mm.
just wanted to give it a +1. So I've been meaning to tell Robert Haas that, and I haven't had a chance yet. So maybe he'll listen to this episode and he'll discover the compliment that way.
Yeah, I personally attended a number of those sessions, and it was always like interesting thing. It would be better to meet face to face and like have a chat about the problem, about that like personally, right? But this is like the next best thing, and like for many people who do not go to Postgres conferences for like whatever reason, or can't go, uh, it's the only option possible, right? So uh, I think I agree that it was like a good thing that Robert came up with this idea and started actually organizing that. And it definitely is a fair amount of work to actually keep it running. So um, yeah.
Okay, so you said that one of your talks is going to be the focus of an upcoming
Hmm.
monthly hacking workshop. Is it one of your performance related talks, or huh, are all your talks performance related?
So so the next month is going to be, I think, um, the talk from um, what was that? PGConf EU 2024, I think, which was about um, the performance archaeology or something, I think, uh, about like how the performance evolved over the years. Let me check. I know that
I
uh,
I did a little research right before we started
okay.
today's podcast, and just here are my proof points for why I think so many of your talks are about performance. Um, Next month in March at Nordic PG Day, which is happening in Helsinki this time, you're giving a talk on efficiently approximating and estimating percentiles and histograms,
Hmm.
which you also gave that talk in FOSDEM PG Day a couple
Yes.
of weeks ago, right? Okay. And then for Posat 2026, and I have insider information here. You're going to be giving a talk about random page cost in Postgres,
Hmm.
like why the default is 4.0 and whether you should lower it for SSDs and things like that. Last year at Posat, you gave a talk, the performance archaeology talk, 20
Right.
years of improvements. And then PGConf EU last fall, you talked about fast path locking. So
Hmm.
I don't know. Do you ever give a talk about anything besides performance?
So I would say that actually the the percentiles, the estimating percentiles, is like not really performance related, or at least not about Postgres improvements itself, because this is about extensions and about like a concept of sketches that is from like streaming databases and that's so on.
Okay, but
So
I want to debate you on that because the whole reason people use approximation algorithms is because they want to get to an answer
yes,
faster.
right. Yeah, I do work in the field of like performance stuff. So my talks are about like performance. So that's definitely true. Yes. Um, the the percentile talk is a bit different in that it's not really about Postgres feature, right?
It's
It's
not about the
about
core, you mean?
yes, it's not about the Postgres core. It's
Okay,
about
I'll
like
give
a
you that.
research papers implemented using Postgres, but it's like a
But
different
also,
thing.
you're the maintainer of the T Digest extension for
Yes,
Postgres, am I right?
yes.
Okay. So
So
I,
I mean,
I
like it's my hobby to read research papers and like do stuff using Postgres, which is amazing that we can actually use the extensibility of Postgres to do this kind of stuff like very easily. Um,
okay,
but
so I don't want
yeah,
to elevate you on a pedestal and put myself down, but it's my hobby to read detective novels, and it's your
Hmm.
hobby to read research papers on mathematical concepts that speed things up. So that's one way in which you and I are different, I guess. Oh,
Okay.
speaking of you, really quick side note: can someone in the text chat tell us who won that hockey game? It must be over by now.
I think it
Maybe
was
I.
Canada.
Oh, really? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm happy for Aaron and I'm sad for you, Tomash.
Uh, happens.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. Um all right, so let's flip back to performance for a second. Um I don't know if you can articulate this. I don't actually know if sometimes it's very hard for me to describe my emotions, but I'm trying to imagine like if there's a special feeling that you associate with solving a performance problem, like getting to the answer, realizing it's going to speed things up a lot.
Hmm.
I don't know. How does that feel?
Uh, I don't remember like any explicit emotions, but it's definitely like a good feeling that you solved the problem. So there is definitely some like amount of like satisfaction or like feeling of satisfaction and achievement. And I think like everyone needs a little bit of that when working, that you actually achieve like feeling of like achievement something. Um, so I definitely do have that. Sometimes it's like it takes a long time actually to get it done. Like right now, I'm working on the index prefetching with Peter Geoghegan, and that's a page that I think I started working on like 3 years ago, and it's still not committed, right? So hopefully for like Postgres 19, we will have something, at least part of that committed.
Um, when you say index prefetching, I know that means something to some of our listeners,
Hmm.
but there's other listeners who will be like, so what? Like, why, who's that going to help? And in what scenario?
So it will help anyone who is using index scans or like indexes in Postgres, um, because index scans are the main source of random IO, which especially on like regular storage. Um, to get good performance, you need to actually issue the IO request like early enough, so that you don't have to wait for the actual data once you get to actually need that. So um, it's part of the asynchronous IO work, uh, which is done by like Andres and Thomas Monroe and Melanie and various other people both in the Microsoft team and in the Postgres community in general. Um, and it's a way to better utilize the storage, right? Which for database is an important thing.
Okay. So maybe Postgres 19, which the last commit fest is next month, right?
Right. I mean,
For
commit
feature
fests
freeze.
are, yes. I mean, the
Not the
feature freeze is like early April, like
Yeah.
first
I
week
don't
of
mean the
April.
last one ever. I mean the final commit fest prior to
Hmm.
feature freeze for Postgres 19 specifically.
Yeah, I mean, commit fests are a bit obsolete at this point, but we still use them. But yes, next month is like when we need to actually get it into Postgres, uh, into the Git repository.
So one of the things that I think might not be obvious to someone who's just starting out.
Mhm.
Like if someone isn't sure they would be good at performance, they might conclude that they're not going to be good because they see a performance problem and they have no idea how to solve it in the beginning. So when you start tackling a performance issue, do you know how to solve it in the beginning?
No,
Is it-
I mean, um, and that's how I started, like 25 years ago. Like you just have a slow query, and you need to somehow figure out like why is it slow, right? Like, or how to make it faster, or like, is it missing an index? Maybe. Is the query written in like in an efficient way? Could be also the case. And I'm still in in this situation like nowadays, right? Because there's so much code and so much functionality in Postgres that I just don't know all the pieces. So um, I think the approach is you need to be systematic, right? Like you need to look at the slow query and start by profiling. Maybe you can try a couple things like rewrite the queries a couple times, or uh, you can use explain analyze to investigate like which part of the query is slow, and that kind of stuff, right? Like um,
And when you say profiling, can you tell me more about what you mean?
Well, profiling means either explain analyze or using like one of the tools from the operating system to actually profile CPU time and that kind of stuff. So,
Tools like
like perf, for example, in Linux,
okay.
right? I assume that like on Windows there's like a different profiler and so on. But I definitely use like perf. You could probably also use things like dtrace and uh, that kind of stuff.
Shout out to Brian Cantrell there. And
Yeah,
Solaris. And Open Solaris. Sorry,
yeah,
that's
and
life.
I think for profiling, the website I use most of the time to actually find the proper incantation of like whatever tool. That's Brandon Gregg's like a website. So th- that's uh, that's a good source, right?
And Brendan is another person who
Yes.
once worked at Sun Microsystems. So, sorry for anyone who's listening who doesn't know that I used to work in the kernel group at Sun. I owe a lot of my formative years to those people and that team. Um, okay, so one of the other words you used earlier is talked about experimenting
Hmm.
in trying to tackle performance problems. And I'm
Hmm.
assuming you do a bunch of benchmarking too as you progress further along. Am I right?
Yes, well, I think that's natural, right? Like, if you are working on performance, then and if your goal is to improve performance and behavior of the system, then like you need to prove that your patch actually does that, right? So you just need to do a lot of benchmarking for that reason. But I also learn by doing benchmarks. Like I I learn about how the system works by actually trying different things, like exposing the system to different inputs, and kind of like learning uh, how the heuristics in the algorithm, for example, behaves in practice. Because it, it, I definitely am not one of the people who can look at piece of code and kind of like immediately predict how it's going to behave in performance. Like, uh, is it going to be fast? Is it going to be slow? Or like, I don't know. So I definitely need to do a bunch of testing and actually figure out, like, are there maybe some weird like cases where it doesn't behave correctly or something like that.
Do you find that you also, as you progress along this, like, I'll call it a journey for each particular
Hmm.
performance problem that you tackle, um, do do you find that you also have to benchmark to make sure that you're not slowing down other parts of Postgres?
Oh
Like
yeah,
speeding something
absolutely.
up and slowing something else?
I think that's like, for example, I mentioned the index prefetching work,
Yeah.
and making sure we are not causing regressions in in cases in queries that do not actually benefit from uh, asynchronous I/O or like from prefetching, is a huge part of the benchmarking. Like making sure that uh, we are not causing trouble to people who will not benefit from the patch, um, is important, I think, uh, and it's definitely important for other patches as well, right?
What are your go-to benchmarking tools? Like if somebody wants to delve into this more, where do they start? What do they look at?
So I that's a really difficult question. I mean,
Mm,
because
I'm
it
good at that.
depends on. I mean, the tool that I use most of the time is probably like pgbench, right? But I'm not really using that with the built-in workload, right? Like pgbench can also be used to kind of like orchestrate your custom benchmark, like just run queries that you specify. And what exactly those queries will be heavily depends on what kind of patch are you working on, right? So in a way, uh, like constructing the benchmark is actually a way to learn about the patch, right? So, for example, if I'm going to work on a patch that supposedly, for example, optimizes aggregation, like group by queries, then the built-in workload in pgbench is completely useless because it doesn't have any like a single group by. So I will have to construct queries uh, and data sets, um, and then I can actually use the pgbench to actually run that, right? And it will generate random queries and that kind of stuff, but I have to construct the workload to actually test. Similarly, there are patches that are optimizing, a join planning, like join search, like in which order to join tables and so on. And again, the built-in pgbench workload is completely useless for this because it doesn't have any joins, right? So I will have to benchmark that patch. I will have to think about like, okay, so I need to test like queries with different numbers of joins, maybe different types of data sets, different data distributions, and that kind of stuff. So even just like constructing the 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 benchmark is a way to actually learn about the patch. So, for example, this is a great way to do a review of a patch that you know nothing about yet. So, just
Oh.
going through the mental exercise of actually So how would I test this, right? Like, if I want to actually show that the patch helps, I will have to do this, right? Like the data set would look like this. Um, but if I want to show that, like, what's the worst case? Like, in which cases the patch will perform poorly? Those are like mental exercises that you need to go through during the review, and maybe the patch uh, misses one of those cases, right? Uh, and then you have a review. So
So, what you're saying is that you can build up your skills of assessing Postgres performance or assessing performance impact, not just by working on these patches yourself, but by doing patch review and coming up with creative ways to look at the the ramifications of something that's being proposed.
yes, yes,
Cool.
I think,
I like it.
and I think this is also like extremely important part of the review and extremely valuable part of the review, because sometimes the review can be like quite superficial, right? Like you will point out like typos and like spelling mistakes and like naming issues in functions. That's fine, but especially for like more complex patches, it's important to actually talk about these trade-offs, actually, like a design, architecture, and so on, and also about these aspects of like, is it actually properly implemented, or like does it actually address all the corner cases, and so on. So yeah, and as I said, I mean, like, when I have a patch that uh, I haven't looked at before and I need to start doing like a review, one way is to look at the diff and like think about like what the patch should be doing and so on. What works for me better is actually doing some experiments with the patch and like trying to do, trying to expose the patch to cases that are kind of like weird.
Okay. Um, okay, so maybe I'm going to make an observation or two,
Hmm.
actually, that may be obvious, but you tell me. What I'm hearing from all of this conversation is that the mentality that you bring to your work on performance and Postgres
Hmm.
is that you start off by being very curious. Like when you've
Hmm.
walked through your examples, you're asking lots of questions. And
Hmm.
so I feel like if someone's wondering if they are a future performance hacker on a database, that curiosity might be a prerequisite that you kind of need. Is that fair?
So it definitely is for me, right? Like
Okay.
I need to be able to ask questions, and I'm trying, even during like when reviewing a patch by other people, I'm trying to more to ask questions than like point out issues, right? Um, but I don't know if like other people work the same way. Probably not. Um,
Okay. All right. I'm generating something from a sample set of 1,
hmm,
which we all know is not a good thing to do. So that's fair.
hmm,
Um, but I don't know. I don't think I'm generating from a sample set of 1. I've worked with a lot of performance engineers in my life, and I used to
hmm,
manage a performance engineering team, and I do feel like curiosity is one of the hallmark traits. Doesn't mean you can't
hmm.
be uncurious and succeed in this space. You probably can, but I don't know. Seems important, or seems
Yeah, I
commonly
think
shared.
I think curiosity in general is probably important and like required. But I know that like other hackers in the Postgres community definitely do work in different ways. So, for
Sure.
example, I'm now collaborating with Peter Geoghegan, and his approach to problems is like very different. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I actually do enjoy the collaboration because of that, right? Because
Okay.
we kind of like both complement each other in some way.
So you're like a super team.
Yeah,
Superhero?
I think I, I'm maybe a sidekick, but yes.
Okay, so the second observation I have is that I saw a diagram once that had it was like a tree with branches, or you
Hmm,
could think of it as a road system with a lot of dead ends on
hmm,
it. And it was about the process of iteration. And
hmm,
in my career, I have collaborated extremely well with people who are comfortable iterating to make something better. And I've collaborated poorly, like not
hmm,
well, with people who are like, just want to get to the answer, just want to get there fast, good enough for government work. No, 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 we don't need to revise this again. Revising it again is a waste of my time. Don't
hmm.
waste my time. And anyway, I feel like iteration is important. And maybe that's because that's my process. And what you described, like it sounded like you were willing to take multiple steps, come at a problem from multiple angles, like go down dead ends and come back, but you never gave up, like in solving these problems, even if you didn't know as you were going if you were going down the right path. Am I off
Yeah,
base?
I would say that like dead ends are part of the game. So you just need to once in a while like explore something that actually is not the proper solution, like or like figuring out what is the right trade-off in some of the algorithms or like solutions. Um, I think that's important. Yes.
Very cool.
Like
I like
the
hearing that because it validates my world philosophy. Um, but it's okay. Not everybody has to enjoy going down dead ends and iterating. That's fine.
Yeah, so
Um,
I think it's like a a brainstorming in a way, like figuring out like what is the right solution.
um, Okay, so before we wrap, I'm trying to figure out if I have covered all of the examples or things that we should be talking about with regards to why it's so fun to hack
Hmm.
on Postgres performance. I'm trying to make sure that we have met the promise of the title of this episode. So, is there anything else that's really fun about it that we haven't covered?
Not that I can think of. I mean, like I'm sure there is a lot of like interesting, funny stories about different patches, but I don't remember anything that I would mention right now, I guess.
Okay. If you think of anything right after we hang up today, um, if you have a link to a particular patch
Hmm.
that is like the canonical reference, or like
Hmm.
this was a good example of a good first performance patch or something like that. I don't know. If anything comes to you, I can include it in the show notes as long as I get it by tomorrow. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't want to overwhelm people with 35 links, but one or two of them might be interesting. Um, which actually leads me to mention, do you tag certain patch ideas as patches that need to be done, like problems that need to be tackled? Do I remember correctly that you have a list somewhere scrolled away?
Um, like in what sense? I mean, like
Maybe it's a
I've
good
been
first patch. Is it
so
good
I've
first
been
patch?
posting on my blog. I've been like trying to propose a couple ideas for like that might be a good idea for a good topic for like first patch for new contributors. Um, I think those are on my blog. Um,
Okay.
I'm not sure if there are still some of those ideas, uh, because people are already working on a couple of those, I think. So I'm not sure if there is something still available. Uh,
Okay.
I would need to
What is
check.
what is the name of that tag? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I think it was a patch idea, probably.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are any interesting ones that are available that have that
Hmm.
tag, we can include it in the show notes. We'll do a search
Yeah, I think
after.
this is also something people can discuss with me on during the office hours, because one thing I found, and I'm judging by my personal experience, is that I I'm much better when I hack on something that actually I personally am interested in, right? Like, so when someone just gives you like a topic for a patch and tells you like do this, I think people are. It's very easy to lose interest or like give up after a while. Um, so I think it's better to actually look for a topic that actually is interesting for you personally, or that is interesting because maybe it's from a field of mathematics that you've been like working on before, or maybe it's interesting for your employer or something, right? Like, so there's some sort of like uh, interest. So what I do suggest people is to maybe go through the CommitFest app and like look at the topics and like figure out like what patches could be like interesting. But it's also something that I'm open to discuss during my office hours, right? So you, if you send me an email with a note that you don't know what to work on, um, I'm okay having like a chat, and like then I can suggest to you a couple of things. Like it's not going to be maybe a new patch. It's going to be like a patch someone else is already working on. But like reviewing patches written by other people is extremely important, or like extremely useful way to actually learn about code. So that's what I would recommend, actually.
So, and I think that's interesting because at least for me initially, and this was a very superficial conclusion. I was wrong.
Hmm.
But I used to assume that patch review was all about like QA. It was all about ensuring the quality of the committed patch, right? Doing the
Hmm.
review to make sure. But it turns out that's only half the motivation right there. And the other half the motivation is to skill up everybody who's involved on the Postgres project. It's a great way for new people to start to learn and understand the system and the code. Agree,
Yeah.
disagree? Okay.
Um, I think it definitely is like a very important way to learn about the code. But also, it is a QA, but also I think like having a patch doesn't mean that this is the right solution, right? So um, there is always maybe a better way to actually solve the problem, or maybe sometimes it happens that the patch actually is not like a problem worth solving. So uh, that can also happen, of course, right?
Um, when I think about patch review, I'm sometimes reminded of, I think it was a year ago exactly, Robert Haas was on this podcast
Hmm.
and he was talking about the mentoring program for Postgres.
Hmm.
Robert, of course, is a Postgres committer, a major contributor, works at EDB, has been involved in the project for a long time. I'm not sure whether it's longer or not as long as you, but you both have been involved for decades, it
Oh,
seems,
Robert is definitely like a longer.
than you.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, but one of the things he said is one of the first ways that he got involved, he of course went to the mailing lists and was reading PGSQL hackers and trying to spin up that way.
Hmm.
And then as he started to participate in patch review, because he figured out this is a great way to learn, right? And he
Hmm.
wanted to learn. Um, he asked himself as he approached a patch review, can I say what Tom Lane would say before Tom Lane says it? Because Tom Lane, of course, is brilliant and a very long-term Postgres contributor and
Hmm.
clearly had a lot of smart things to say, still does to this day. And I just thought that was funny. Can I Can I say what Tom Lane is going to say before Tom says it? And that's how he challenged himself. And I do think it's interesting. What that reminds me of is that when artists who are learning how to paint go to art school, one of the things that they are asked to do is to like paint a copy of very famous paintings from previous generations masters, and they're asked to paint it because replicating what has been done before and what is considered great can be a way to learn. You then have to forge your own path as an artist, create your own unique designs and approaches and everything. And the same is true with writers. Sometimes like you can be given an assignment, which is like, okay, take the first paragraph from this very, very famous book and then evolve it in a different direction. But start by typing that in and starting there. And I don't know. I think it's interesting. Channeling people that have come before as a way of learning. All right. That's a little random rabbit hole from me. I will include a link. I found that the tag on your blog was Patch Idea. So I'll include a link in the show notes. There's only 4 of them on that list right now. Maybe if you find out they're all being done or have recently been done, then I can exclude it. Just let me know. Cool. And
I definitely will post a couple more ideas in the future. So I think the tag is definitely valid.
Okay. I'll include the link then. And the other thing I wanted to chime in with for anybody listening who is thinking about going to PGConfDev in Vancouver in May, one of the organizers, Melanie Plagueman, dropped into the chat during today's recording, and she clarified that the meet and eat dinners, which are open to anybody who's attending, will be on both Tuesday and Thursday this year. So there'll be 2 nights where you have an opportunity to connect. I'm assuming Wednesday there's a evening reception that is part of the event as well, because there always is on that day. And the other thing I'll say is I don't have any knowledge of this, but my suspicion is that next year PGConfDev won't be in Vancouver. It might be back in Montreal, which is where it was last year. So if you do live nearby, maybe you're on the West Coast and you're thinking, oh, I won't go this year, I'll wait till next year. Don't do that, because it may not be on the West Coast next year. So, all right. Thank you, Tomasz. This has been fun. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I'm not the only one who appreciates what you do, both for the Postgres code and performance, as well as for the community. So thank you for coming
Thank
on
you
the
for
show.
inviting me, and thanks for the chat. It was quite pleasurable, I think.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, if you liked today's episode and you want to hear more of these Talking Postgres episodes, you should subscribe on Apple and Spotify and YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And please tell your friends, because word of mouth is one of the best ways for a podcast to grow a listenership, if that's a word. You can always get to past episodes and get links to subscribe on the different platforms at talkingpostgres.com. And we include transcripts on the episode pages on talkingpostgres.com too. We work very hard to make sure everything is correct, Postgres is spelled properly, etc., etc. And a big thank you to everybody who joined today's live recording and participated in the text chat on Discord.